Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Wow, people came. You know, sometimes when you have a party and you're not sure if anybody's going to come, you came. Thank you. We are thrilled. We're going to start. It is 7:01. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Welcome to Conversations About Black Lives Matter with Plymouth Township Police Chief Myrsiades and our Colonial area community. That is you. My name is Bridget Gill. I am one of the founding members of CAARSEA, Colonial Area Anti-Racism and Social Equity Alliance. I am a resident of Plymouth Meeting, and so I'm especially thrilled that this is happening tonight, and we are really excited that you're all here. I am reminding everyone that this town hall is being recorded. And this is a very important 90 minutes ahead of us. This conversation needs to happen. And already, because it's happening, we are moving in the right direction. One of our goals tonight, among many, is to start to close the widening gap between Black Lives Matter and the police department. We are living in a society that is deeply divided. I think all of us know that, especially now. You're on one side of something, you're on the other side. You're on a Blue Lives Matter side, you're on a Black Lives Matter side. Tonight, we need to be deeply honest about this reality and work as a community to break down the walls and the barriers that are standing right now so that we can elevate Black and Brown voices in our community and loud and clear speak against police brutality against Black and Brown people. This is something that all Americans must come around to support, and we hope tonight is a start. Tonight's purpose, in addition to that, increase awareness, understanding, and community among residents of the Colonial area. Discuss community members' concerns regarding officers' interaction with people of color. Identify opportunities for community members to hold Plymouth Township Police Department accountable for equitable treatment of all people within our community. Let's talk a little bit about tonight's agenda. We're going to talk about Zoom norms and our town hall guidelines. We're going to speak just a little bit about CAARSEA and its core team members. We're going to do introductions of our special guest and our moderator tonight. We have some testimonials from community members. CAARSEA has put together some questions prior to this program, and then we are going to open the floor for our community members in the chat to share comments or ask questions as well. Guidelines for community engagement, Zoom etiquette. I believe we've all been on Zoom long enough, but let's just go over it again. Zoom etiquette for community town hall. Mute your audio and video so that everyone's attention can be directed to the speakers. For your own convenience, you may want to change your Zoom view to speaker view. You can find this modification on the top right corner of your Zoom screen. Engage in the event by using the chat and reaction functions. I believe the lower toolbar of your Zoom screen, there is an option to clap if you want. What is the other? Thumbs up, depending on what version of Zoom you have, please engage that way. And interruptions of the speakers are not welcome. Rules of engagement for candid conversations in the chat box. I did say before, we invite you to share comments, ask questions, but here are some guidelines. Please speak from the I perspective. Steer away from using generalizations or stereotypes. And in this forum, please assume the best in others. This is a no judgment zone. All perspectives should be respected. And if you didn't catch in the chat, we are introducing ourselves to the community because we have to do this virtually. This is the best we can do. So if you haven't already, please hop into the chat box and see which of your neighbors are here. and new people that you might meet. So do that right now for us. That would be wonderful. I'm going to talk a little bit about CAARSEA before we get on to the bulk of our conversation. The Colonial Area Anti-Racism and Social Equity Alliance is a local group dedicated to combating anti-racism. And here's our vision statement. The vision of CAARSEA is for the Colonial area to be a community united to overcome racial injustice, where diversity is welcome, encouraged, celebrated, and valued. 3 things. 1, we work together to create and support systemic change at a local level in areas such as the schools, police department, and government structures. 2, we respond directly to issues of discrimination, racism, and social inequity in our community. And 3, we raise awareness, model and facilitate courageous conversation, and provide resources for community learning and engagement. A brief history of CAARSEA. We began in early June after the murder of George Floyd. This began with a group of 8 to 10 of us across Plymouth, White Marsh, Conchie. We had all gathered at an event on June 1st, a circle in the park, in Miles Park along Germantown Ave. I'm sure many of you were there as well. We came home that night and realized that our community isn't going to be silent anymore about this. And so we started a conversation. The conversation turned into a Facebook group. We're almost 1,000 members. It's thriving. Our Facebook group, our online community is thriving, especially in this climate of the pandemic. But we are excited to engage beyond that tonight, and we are looking for other opportunities to do that. So please do share with us if you have other ideas on how we can engage the community. And then hopefully soon, when we are out of our houses, we can get together physically in the same space and talk about these issues that will strengthen our community. I'd like to just take a minute to ask our core team leadership to just turn on your camera and turn off mics. I don't know if we can turn off mics, but when I call you, if you could just wave. Gail K, Juliet, Sonia, Jamina, Rennie, Luann, Melissa, Liz, and Allie. Thank you so much. That is our team. Wonderful. And now to the main event. I would like to introduce our special guest this evening, Chief John Myrsiades, and our moderator, Gail Plant, who is also one of the founding members of CAARSEA. I'm just going to read a brief bio on each of you before you begin. Chief John, which he has invited us to call him Chief John because I imagine people may mispronounce your name. So I have it phonetically spelled in front of me right now. That's why I'm killing it. But I understand that we appreciate Chief John. John has faithfully served the citizens of Plymouth Township since January of 1989. In that time, he has had the privilege to work in the detective division, special operations, and hold each rank in the police department before being appointed chief of police in June of 2019. He possesses a bachelor's degree in public safety administration, a master's degree in law enforcement and public safety leadership, and was fortunate enough to attend the 241st session of the FBI National Academy. John is honored to lead the finest law enforcement agency in the state and is proud to serve by the side of the remarkable men and women who safeguard our community. John and his wife, Bobby Jo, are residents of Plymouth Township and enjoy staycations with their puppies and spending time with their 3 grown children and family. Welcome, Chief John. Gail Plant, our moderator. Gail is the proud wife of Ronald Plant and mother to 3 beautiful daughters, Sanaji, Soraya, and Jayla. Gail's family is one of her most joyous and proudest accomplishments. Gail was raised in urban Philadelphia community and attended the Philadelphia public school system for her middle and high school years. Gail received her bachelor's degree from Drexel University in computer information systems. Immediately following graduation from Drexel, she began her career at a local company where she recently celebrated her 25th anniversary. Gail received her master's degree in leadership development in 2015. It was then that she ignited her passion of event planning and launched Myrsiades, her very own event company planning business. Also in 2016, along with her business partner, she launched a nonprofit, Young Ladies in Waiting, serving young ladies, middle school and high school teen girls in PA, New Jersey, and Delaware. Gail has lived in the Colonial area community for 14 years. She has over 20 years of experience in community activism in Philadelphia and other surrounding areas. When the call of action was presented to Gail to join CAARSEA in its leadership team, with no hesitation, she answered with a firm yes. Gail firmly believes that all citizens should have equal rights and opportunities. Her involvement with community programs throughout her life has aided in the emergence of her passion to join CAARSEA in bringing social equity to pass in the community. When she leaves this earth, her aspiration is to have inspired all to open their mind and embrace all that God has planned for themselves, the community, the country, and the world. And a personal note is we are just so blessed and grateful to have Gail in our presence. She has just been such a light in this planning process so far. So I hand the floor over to you all. One note is that at this point, I would like if everybody could turn off their cameras, and you will be muted so that the focus can be on the moderator and our special guest. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bridget, and good evening, excuse me, to everyone. So Bridget, that last part of the bio was Bridget's ad, so thank you, Bridget. I'm like, oh, you want to make me get emotional? That's not what I wanted to do, but thank you so much for the reading the bio, and then welcome, Chief John. And we definitely appreciate you joining us and answering the call. And just so for you guys, there was no hesitance from the chief. When we asked, he immediately responded, yes, I'll do it. And he's been very pleasant throughout the process of planning this event. So thank you, Chief, for that. So I am going to dig right in and get started with our questions. So our first question is, if you could just share a little bit about your vision for the Plymouth Township Police Department.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I guess some of the things that I've been saying all along, actually, from the time that I interviewed for the position, is what I tried to do was model what we would do in the Plymouth Township Police Department after the 6 pillars of professional policing, something that was put together under President Obama with some local leadership, Charles Ramsey, who was a police commissioner in Philadelphia. And it actually is some pretty common sense things, but sometimes common sense isn't so common. So a lot of the types of things that we wanted to do, training was a big one. And my vision for training wasn't so much the technical issues that police officers need. I really wanted to focus on leadership training, and not just for command personnel or supervisory personnel, not so much of how to manage people, but how to lead a community. And a lot of times leading a community is sitting back and listening to what they have to say, what they need, problems that they find in your institution, and to be a lightning bolt for change, to listen, and sometimes it's a hard thing to do because you have to put your feelings aside and realize that these aren't things that you might want to hear, that you might even agree with, but you have to open your eyes and realize somebody had talked to me about inherent bias. John Milligan, he's the president of the Norristown chapter of the NAACP, a very nice man who I've developed a nice relationship with. And one of the things that struck me that he said was that it's so important for all of us to realize that we have these inherent biases in each other. People come out and say, that's not my issue. I'm not a biased person. I don't see that. And it's basically impossible. This is something that society has. It's a societal issue. You're brought up in such a way that you have some types of inherent bias. And the first step in challenging something like that is first admitting that, yes, I must have this. And then secondly, constantly working on changing those perceptions that you have. And that's not taking a class. It's not discussing it, once a month in a meeting. It's something you constantly have to look at yourself. You constantly have to talk about. You constantly have to train out of your system to realize that a lot of times we do see things with, rose-colored glasses. We don't see things as they are. You see them as you perceive them, and that's something that I've tried to instill. I think we have a good, strong core group of people. We have a lot of young people, which is always nice because their way of thinking is more modern, but they're also more open to hearing things. And one of the ways I'm also trying to instill leadership qualities is to diversify the police department. And that's not as easy as it sounds, because you can say, I want to diversify. You can say we welcome all people. But what concrete steps can you take to make that happen? So we actually worked very hard with Township Council, who was very supportive. And we worked together with our Civil Service Commission, which made great strides in changing the rules and regulations that we have. There are certain rules we have to work within, but we were only utilizing maybe 50 to 60%. So we really went the whole gamut. So some of the things that we did was that, am I using too much time here? Because I know you have a lot of questions.
No, you actually kind of went into my next question. So around demographics. So specifically, you talked a little bit about the makeup and how it's currently not diverse. And I know that you guys are currently hiring. And so just if you could talk a little bit more about the makeup of gender from men and women, and then people of color in the department, as well as what are some of the common calls and complaints that you all receive as a department?
As far as how diverse we are, we're not nearly as diverse as we'd like to be. As I said, it's very difficult. In fact, I just had this conversation with the chief of Norristown, Mark Talbot. He was one of the chiefs that we used as on our oral board for our sergeant's exam. And he was talking about how difficult it is, no matter how hard you try to even get candidates. Because what we found is maybe about 10% of the people that we get taking our tests were minorities, maybe another 10% were female. So traditionally, we get a lot of white males. So again, we had to find ways, how do you change that? So to that point, one of the things we did with the Civil Service Commission was we took away as many impediments as we could find. The biggest one, I thought, was that we required Act 120 certification, which is basically the police academy. We said before you can even take our test, you had to have that. Well, that costs about $6,000. It takes about 6 months to go through if you were to put yourself through. And it's a 40-hour-a-week commitment. It's full time. So who can afford not to work a job plus pay all that money on the chance that they get a job? Because it's only good for about a year. And then that certification, then you have to start taking updates. So certainly it's tough for anybody. But if you're going to try and recruit, let's say, minorities that might not have the same access to the finances or that education, you're basically cutting them off. So that was something that we got changed with working with the Township Council. We changed a lot of the rules and the grading. We talked about it's a civil service test. Can you really say that someone who scores high on a basic civil service test is more qualified to be a police officer than somebody else? So we tried to change the grading of that. 50% now counts toward the written instead of the 60% that we used to have. We gave more weight to the oral exam when you can actually talk to a person and find out more about them and try and elevate good people that you see higher in the list. We also tried to increase, well, we did increase how many people we call for the oral from 30 people to 50 people. So we get a larger pool. And then another thing that we did was something that was already accessible to us, but never really was used, was what's called the rule of three, that basically the top three candidates you can recommend to council, and certainly council would have the ultimate decision of who you want to appoint. So we figured to better take advantage of finding good candidates, to better diversify the department, it doesn't have to be the number one scoring person. You basically had more latitude. So those are some of the things that we've done to try, and we're actually giving it our first test now where all these rules are in place. So we're excited about that.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate it. So now I'm going to actually pivot into what I'm titling storytelling. And so these are stories. So I'm going to either tell the story or I'm going to read it. We did ask prior to this town hall if anyone wanted to share a story, they could share it. They could either tell it themselves or they could share it anonymously. So I'm actually going to share my own personal story first, and then I'm going to share with you two anonymous stories. And I'm going to share the story, and then I'm going to ask if you could respond to each of them one at a time. And so my own personal story, it's my story, really my husband's story that I'm going to share. So about, I guess, 6 years ago, we were at our home, and we live in Plymouth Meeting, and we were at our home. We had a police officer that lived in our community, which it was not rare for him to ride past and wave and speak, which he did frequently. On that day, it was a Sunday. We had just came home from church. That happened. But what was different was there was a police officer sitting in his car at the corner. We thought that was a little bit odd. We had family over, and we were outside the whole time. I guess for about an hour and a half, we were standing outside talking to family, and the police officer stayed at this corner the entire time. It was a little strange, but didn't think anything of it. Our family then left. My husband started working on his car in the driveway for about another hour. Police officer still sat at the corner. My husband then left to go get food, and it was taking him a very long time, and I didn't understand, like, why is it taking him so long? I realized he left his phone, so I couldn't call him to find out. The store is a 2-minute drive. Didn't understand why he was taking so long. So he gets back home, and I asked him, like, what took so long? He didn't want to tell me. And then he told me he was pulled over by the same police that had been sitting at the corner for 2.5 hours. And he was pulled over because there was a robbery, and they said he fit the description. And they made him get out. They checked him, and then they went back to their cars, and they came back and they said, your description does not match. And they apologized, and my husband came home. The fact that they apologized was okay, but more importantly, they racial profiled my husband, basically. And so the next day, it was on the news that the young man that did rob the bank, that young man looked nothing like my husband. And so that is my story. I'll give you, again, a couple of minutes to respond to that, Chief. Your thoughts?
I mean, there's no way around it. That sounds terrible. And these are some of the things that we talk about and that we've actually had training for. You would think you wouldn't have to have training for something like that, but I think that's the stuff that's more important than the technical issues we do. one of the first things that we did, and this was the whole police department, not just our officers, but our civilian staff, the people that take the calls, that initiate everything. We hired the Anti-Defamation League to do training department-wide for those types of things. That a lot of times calls are initiated, not in this case doesn't seem, but initiated from a neighbor calling in. I see someone suspicious walking down my street. I've never seen them before. And what it turns out to be is I see, let's say, a black male wearing a hood, and to them that's suspicious. Well, that's not suspicious, but that's the type of thing that, you know, we try and explain to our officers. First of all, you have to nip that kind of thing in the bud. You know, we don't respond to things like that because the color of someone's skin or the clothing that they're wearing or that they're walking down the street that maybe they don't even live at is not illegal, is not suspicious, is not wrong. And the fact that a lot of officers would say, well, I was polite and I explained myself and I apologized. You know, I even spoke in the meeting and I said, well, let me put myself in that position. It's humiliating. It's demeaning. It makes you feel lesser than a person. So it's bad enough if it happens once, but if it happens 3 times in a day, if it happens every day of the month, if it happens every year of your life, I mean, what do you feel like? And then, of course, what do you think about the police? Because they're not there to protect you or to serve you. They're there just to discriminate against you, whether it's what they're seeing or what a neighbor is calling. So these are the kind of things that we've made a concerted effort to understand and to get it from the beginning, from our call takers, when these people call, to talk to that caller and even explain that we're not responding for something like that. I'm not even going to send a car to drive by to see if something's suspicious. People are allowed to walk. People are allowed to look different. People are allowed to be in areas that they don't live in. And they might seem like minor things, and maybe that's why in the past a lot of time hasn't been focused on that type of thing. But it's these small things that are demeaning to people and hurt at the very, you know, at your very heart, at your very being. So that's a terrible thing. For the same reason he was embarrassed, your husband was embarrassed to tell you because you feel lesser than. So yeah, I do understand that. And that is something that we're very careful to talk about, to constantly train that.
Are you able to talk about a little bit about the discipline if that were to happen? So in a situation as I described, what would be the disciplinary action for an officer in that situation?
You know, I'll be quite honest and transparent with you. In the past, I don't know that has been a disciplinary issue. When it would come down to looking into it, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be looked into. The focus would be on, were you polite? Did you have cause to stop? Did you have reason to do something like that? So in the past, not much has happened, and maybe that's why it continued to happen. Again, like I said, we're a younger department. When I came on, there were certain things that I prioritized, and these are the types of things that I prioritized over the basic technical aspects of our job. So what I started with mostly was intensive training, and then not just discipline, but counseling, retraining. I've had a few officers that have been disciplined, but what we've done now is we've coupled training with discipline. We'll send them back to some remedial training, because it's not just enough to tell somebody you've done something wrong, but I'm going to retrain you to show you what to do. And then, of course, if it happens again, it gets escalated. I don't want to make it doesn't sound like that's doing very much, but I can tell you in the year and a half that I've been police chief, I've fired 2 of our officers. So we are serious about, we have standards. There are certain expectations that the community has of us, that I have of our officers. And if you can't hold up to those expectations, then you have no place with us.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next story. And again, the community members that submitted these stories would like to remain anonymous. So I am going to read verbatim because I don't want to miss specifically what they said. So bear with me as I read this first story. And they titled it Recognition and Community Involvement. What community member recognition programs exist? I asked because last year my husband chased and cornered 3 young men on what we learned was at least 3 second attempt at a residential break-in and entering in Plymouth. He called 911 and cornered them at the Wells Fargo at Ross from the mall until Plymouth police came. He was thanked verbally by the officers and neighbor whose home was targeted. An officer mentioned a small public recognition letter, FB post, citation. It wasn't specific. We never heard about it again. The lack of recognition wouldn't be so frustrating if it weren't contrasted by other incidents we've experienced. A couple of years ago, my husband was pulled over at Germantown and Hickory after having just turned into Germantown. An officer approached this vehicle with his hand on his gun. My husband saw and sensed the officer's fear. At some point, the officer explained that he thought he was a suspect who had just robbed one of the mattress stores a few hundred feet back. I would imagine a thief just starting his getaway would not be driving at the same speed of a man leaving his home to take his infant to visit grandma. It bothers us what might have occurred if my husband didn't have our baby with him to diffuse the officer's fear, and if he showed signs of being irritated for being pulled over, having just stepped out of his home. How are Black families supposed to trust the police cares for them equally when they experience the attention of possibly being a suspect, but no attention for risking personal harm to protect their neighbors? You can respond, Chief.
Well, I guess it was 2 different questions. I guess the first one, just briefly, as far as recognition goes, we do like to recognize our community members that play a part in life-saving or helping the police in any way, or helping a neighbor. And I can't attest for this incident, but I do know that we have made a point of bringing people in. I know we had an off-duty firefighter not long ago, maybe about a year ago, that saved an elderly woman, pulled her from a burning car. He just happened to be driving by and went across 4 lanes of traffic to pull her out of the car. We had her family, and him come. We've had people that have helped the police in tracking down somebody or giving us information that we've given recognition to. So it is something we do like to do. It sounds like that went through the cracks, and that's a shame because we do want people to know we appreciate their help. And then as to the other matter, it's a tough one because I don't know all the information, but I can certainly see it from that individual's point of view, regardless of what might have happened. I mean, there's a legitimate robbery, and maybe legitimately the car looks the same. But does that really mean as much to the person who's got a baby in the car, or his family, or just leaving home and automatically you're stopped? If it was a situation certainly like the one that your husband encountered, where the suspect doesn't even look like them, or it just happened to be a car that was the same color, it's just not good enough. It's not acceptable. I don't pretend that it doesn't happen sometimes, but that's not something that we allow to happen when we find out about it. And oftentimes we don't hear about these things. There are times when officers jump the gun or are scared for some other reason. But a lot of times these things aren't brought to our attention, and we do encourage people to let us know. And it doesn't have to be, it can be anonymous, just like this is. It can be a phone call, it can be an anonymous letter, it can be an email, because sometimes people don't want to have to come forward, maybe because they don't trust the police. And I can understand, I can sympathize with that. So we do encourage people to complain if there's an issue, so that we can deal with it, because we will deal with it. In fact, we record every complaint that we get, whether it's unfounded or not. We look into everything, and we keep a file, even if it's against an anonymous officer. They don't have a name or anything like that, so that if ever we need to show that things are being looked into, or there needs to be an accounting, we have documentation of what's happened, and then we can take corrective action.
And how, I just want to, before I go to the last story, what would you say you would go about in building trust with the community? You mentioned that you do want the community to trust our fellow police officers, but what would you do as a chief and guide and lead your officers to do to try to build that trust?
I guess what we've already started to do, unfortunately, before COVID hit, we had started with town hall meetings so that we can get people out. Most of it was like this, to hear from the public instead of us coming out there and like we have in the past where we give a meeting about safety, or we give a meeting about some problem that's going on. We tried to turn the table and said, you talk to us. What are the issues? What are the problems? What do you need? Because honestly, that's how this is supposed to work. The community tells its police what it needs, what they think that they're not doing, what they're doing wrong, and we need to work to change that. I mean, that's, we are public servants. That's what we're here for. So that was one thing that we were starting, and another thing that we were just again getting ready to start, that we were trying to build, was something with the kids, and it could be something as simple as, we've got a beautiful community center. We wanted to get basketball games going with the kids, whether they wanted to play with the police or the police would ref them, or our police association would just pay for a night so that whoever came, any kids that came to play, would be playing for free. Just a way to get a chance to have the kids see us and us to see the kids as human beings, rather than, we deal with a certain person for a problem, or they see us in a uniform and they're immediately intimidated because of other experiences they might have had. So we're just looking for a way to humanize both sides. And that was one of the things that we thought that we could do.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll go to the last story in this portion of the night. So I'm going to read it verbatim. I attended a rally for Joseph C. Gale, Commissioner, some time back. I also had a Black Lives Matter sign in my lawn. The following day, I noticed police officers stationed outside my house. I've never experienced that before. I 100% believe it was due to the Fire Joe Gale and Black Lives Matter sign on my lawn. It is my hope that I wasn't being discriminated against, and moving forward, we can stand on our own belief system and have equal rights.
I actually remember that because I got many emails about that. And it was actually kind of ironic, because I explained to that individual that the whole reason we were there was to protect those people that felt threatened. I think the majority of the neighborhood thought that we were there only to protect Joe Gale and his property and his rights, which was still a legitimate concern. But we were there because we had complaints from some of the people with Black Lives Matter sign. In fact, I think they came out and spoke to the officer. Why are you here? Is it you're trying to intimidate me? And he says, no, I'm actually here because we had complaints that people were stealing these signs, and we're trying to make those people feel comfortable also. But you know what? That opens up the whole question, which is a completely legitimate problem, is perception. I had a chief years ago who always told me that if somebody perceives a problem, even if it's not accurate or true, the fact that they perceive that problem is in of itself a problem. So you have to change people's perception. And if changing people's perception is they need to be able to trust their police more, then we have to earn that trust. Because I can sit here and tell you all day, trust us, we're good, we're out there for you. But unless you see it, and you're going to have to see it over the course of years before a lot of people are comfortable with that. And I understand that. I don't expect people to just buy into everything that I'm saying. You're going to have to feel comfortable at your own pace. So this is something that I figured until the day that I retire, I'm hoping to instill something in this police department to change the culture. That was my big thing, change the culture of the police department. And until the community seizes itself, we won't be successful. So it's a long fight, but we're in it for the duration.
Thank you. And so just to kind of comment a little on what you said, right? So historically, right, I'm a Black woman. And so historically, it hasn't been, our experience, right? And to your point, your experience drives some of the behaviors and how you respond to certain things and your actions. One of my favorite quotes from the great late Maya Angelou is, people won't remember what you said. They won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And it is in what you said and what you did that made them feel a certain way. And we should, regardless of the color of our skin, we should feel comfortable being able to report things, as you had stated, right? You're open to and receptive to receiving those. We need to be comfortable. And again, the experiences that we've had historically does not tell us that there is a comfort level there to make those phone calls. And some is in fear, in fear of retaliation, in fear that I won't be heard. And so just to throw that in there as another perspective as well. And so now I'm going to dovetail into some specific questions. So the CAARSEA team, we had a couple of questions that we pre-selected for this session. And then afterwards, I'm going to jump into some of the questions that we received from the community, some of which were pre-submitted, and then some we had asked everyone if you would like for us to ask a question. Of course, this session is only an hour and a half, so we don't have time to answer all questions. However, all questions will be sent to the chief following this town hall if we are unable to get to it during the session. So I'm going to start off with our first CAARSEA question, and it's about the blue or Black Lives Matter. And I guess before I kind of read the question, I'll just make the statement of why does it have to be a or and can't be an and. And so the question is, what is your perspective on and potential solutions that you can offer as chief surrounding the Blue Lives Matter divisiveness? There is a lot of divisiveness between Blue Lives and Black Lives Matter factions. What ways can you as chief bridge that gap? And in your position, can you be a facilitator for conversations between factions within the community?
I do agree that absolutely, as the chief of police, I can facilitate that type of thing. I hope to do that type of thing through our town hall meetings. I thought that was something that was important, and it was something that should be constant, just to give people a space, a time where they can communicate, where they can dialogue, where they can disagree. My biggest thing is tolerance. I agree with you that nothing should be this or that. It could be both. I think at the last meeting that we had, one of the ladies that was a part of your group had mentioned that she had Black Lives Matter sign out, and then neighbors that she has always felt good about and known their children and so forth had put out, I think she said a Blue Lives Matter or a police flag, I'm not sure. But what I say to that again is tolerance, especially when those families know each other and know each other to be good people. I have neighbors throughout me with different political signs. One's one, one's the other. None of those things. Well, I don't think they bother almost anybody in my neighborhood, on my street. Certainly doesn't bother me. A difference of opinion, a different experience that they have, and it's unfortunate that we live in a society that if you don't think the way I think, you're wrong, or you're stupid, or there's some problem. I mean, dialogue, communication, acceptance, and that's the kind of message that I would preach, and that I would hope that when we have town hall meetings, that it can be both. And you don't have to agree with the other side, but it can still be there. You can say, that's fine. You believe it. I respect that you believe it, but I don't. And I think that's okay. That's the way that I was brought up. That's the way that I've brought up my kids. Be tolerant of everybody. Be willing to discuss something. Don't necessarily try and change their mind either. Just be able to speak your piece, and something as simple as live and let live.
Thank you for that. The next question is another, I guess, hot topic in current events, and it's the defunding question. So in light of defunding the police being a flashpoint, what services should be taken off the plate of the police and moved to other services to allow the police to focus on crime prevention? And what would this look like to you?
Actually, it's funny that, well, it's not funny that this has come up, but this is something that I think a lot of police, me especially, have been saying for decades, and it's never been able to come to fruition. Whenever society in general, community can't afford things, they dump it on the police because they're already there. You already have somebody that's there in the middle of the night. You already have somebody that responds to calls, emergencies. So let's just add this to it. I mean, when you think about what most of what police do, it is not criminal in nature. It is not crime fighting per se. I would say 90% of what we do is not crime fighting. What we do by going to domestics, we're not social workers. We don't have degrees in that type of thing, but we're asked to solve those problems. I remember as a 22-year-old, one of my first calls by myself was a domestic where I was dealing with a husband and wife who were in their mid 40s. And I'm telling them, I mean, of course, I wasn't as refined as I am now, but I'm telling them, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I'm thinking afterwards, who am I? I'm not married. I'm just barely an adult. Yet that was tasked to us. Mental health, that's a huge one. That's something that you really should have advanced degrees for. And that's something that we're thrown into to deal with. Something as simple as someone with children with autism. I mean, we're put in situations where we have to deal with a lot of these things. So most of what we do is not crime related. It would be great if there were agencies that could do it. But are you going to get social workers or mental health experts to come out within minutes at 2, 3 in the morning to take that chance by themselves, unarmed, if things escalate without somebody else that can come help them? I mean, I've actually got one quick story, which is actually very sad, but it just kind of brings it back home. We had a woman that we had responded to a couple times for attempted suicide or talking about suicide. And the county had started a program, this isn't all that long ago, where they would have mental health experts come out and relieve the police and take care of it. And they did, and we had a couple officers there, and they were adamant, we want you to go, you need to go. And said, you sure you don't want us? We've been here many times. No, we want you to go, we want you to go. So we left. They handled it within half an hour. They left. They said, she's fine. We talked to her. And that evening she hung herself. There were no repercussions at all. That was it. It was done. It's a shame it happened, but we checked all the boxes and we left. That's not satisfactory to us. That's not something that we would tolerate. But we're not even the experts on that. That's what people are talking about. So I don't disagree with taking those functions away from the police. You're absolutely right. We're not qualified for that. We go through as much training as we can, but that's very little compared to an expert or someone who's gone to college for it or has degrees or does it for a living. I don't know that it's viable, though. I wish it was. I think it's a good idea. And I think it's going to cost a lot more. If you defund, if you take, I don't know, 100,000 from a department like us would be a lot. And put that out in the community, you're going to need $1 million to get that same service. I'm convinced. Because how do you do it? You're talking vehicles, you're talking equipment, you're talking coverage. It's a scary proposition. We've inherited these things, and we've done so out of need, not that we wanted to. It's very difficult to train our officers to do all these different things. It really is. And it isn't our specialty.
Right. But I think you can, I just hear your passion for wanting the change. So I think you can agree that it's worth a try. We need to do something. Everything that changes starts with taking the first step. progress over perfection. So I think this whole topic of defunding is a whole topic that we could have a whole town hall about that specific topic. So I am going to move on because I do want to make sure that you hear from the community members. And so I have forwarded some questions. So I'm going to jump right in and ask these questions. Again, this one is anonymous. It says, in May of 2019, there was a video of a white police officer holding a Black teenager in a chokehold during St. Francis Church's annual carnival in Norristown, circulating the social media. I understand that Plymouth PD was not responsible for this incident, but this happened in our backyard and many other children from our township saw this take place. Is there a coordination between Plymouth PD and neighboring townships? And did Plymouth PD take any action or have any discussion following this event? Also, what efforts are being made to reach out to youth, specifically youth of color in this area?
You know what, as far as that episode, there is always interaction between the police departments. We talk about issues, especially when something happens, something like that. We you know, was it necessary? Did something was wrong? Do we need to change the way we do things? And I'm not really qualified to talk too much about that because I remember the incident, but I don't remember the ins and outs. But one thing I can tell you is that I know the chief, Mark Talbot, and I know that he did an intensive investigation on that, and he dealt with the community. I remember he was dealing with the NAACP and with other community leaders, and he didn't just come out and back his police automatically. He said, I'm going to look into it, and he actually did. And when he saw the whole video and he saw everything, he did not see that was an overreaction by the police when you saw that the police were getting attacked and what they were trying to do. It looked ugly, and a lot of the things that we do and we're subjected to, we're put in the middle of, look very ugly. But in that instance, I can't say that what happened there was wrong. It might have looked wrong, but police are put in the positions where they do fight, where they do strike, where they do grab. And of course, they're put in a position where they're punched and they're grabbed also. And it looks ugly. I from what I remember, that in that case, the police officers had not overreacted. But again, I'm not qualified to speak because I only know from what I heard from him. But I can tell you, in this case, he's an honorable man. And what we try not to do is automatically jump to support our police. I do support our police, but I try and look at it like I would any crime. You start off with a blank slate. And what do I actually see here? And let me go where the evidence takes me and where the people that have seen it takes me. And then you piece it together. And sometimes that takes time and people get frustrated on both sides because they want an answer immediately. Like, who do you support? The cops or the community? Well, you have to support both, but you have to do the right thing wherever that takes you. And sometimes it's not popular. Sometimes it's not popular with your own people. And sometimes it's not popular with the community. But I believe if you try and stick to the facts and do what you truly believe is right, in the end, at least people will respect the decision, even if they're not thrilled with it.
So just a follow-up from that one is, or two actually, follow-up question is when is a chokehold ever a necessity? And then I was not at this event, but I understand just from reading the question that there were a lot of children around. And you mentioned in terms of looking at the evidence and talking to the different people. And again, I know that this is not your situation, but hypothetically, if it was your situation, what is the approach? Because children are watching, right? I don't know if you've seen any of the videos by Emmanuel Acho. He has some videos out there, and it's uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. And he uses a term and said that, thoughts are caught and not taught. And so children are watching. They're watching you, they're watching me, they're watching what we do. And so hypothetically, if you were in this position with your fellow, as your fellow chief, how would you have handled that with the community in terms of getting their perspective on what happened?
Well, certainly you would have to, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to open it up and you have to listen to everybody. You have to see, it's not just your officers, it's the kids that are involved. It's any video that you have, a bigger picture to that, because we just talked about the chokehold in general. I mean, that's something, a lot of the things that we've done have been pre-George Floyd. I mean, these are things that we started from the time that I, came in as being chief. We've completely revamped, or still in the process of revamping, all of our general orders and our policies. And one of those things was the chokehold in general. Basically, the chokehold is not something that can be used unless you truly are fighting for your life. If it's something that, somebody could be killed because you are in fear for your life, then it's something that if you have to use, you would use. But anything absent that, it is not allowed. That is not something that you can use. When you're dealing with children, we always take a step back. You always have to treat them a little bit differently or give them a little bit more leeway for a lot of reasons. Physically, they might not be able to handle as much, but also mentally, they don't understand. Emotionally, they don't understand what's going on. Certainly, if an officer feels threatened by a grown man, he might take one course of action. But if you're dealing with a pregnant woman, we have our officers, you're going to have to take a lot more abuse, and because the stakes are that much higher. I mean, it's not a matter of pushing somebody away from you when now you can, let's say, kill an unborn child. And if you're talking about children, certainly anything that you do not only harms them, but they're still developing in their minds developmentally, and you're going to change the way they view things for the rest of their life. So certainly you have to deal with all these different instances in a different manner and use care. It's just difficult when we're talking about either situations that we weren't involved in, or you're talking in general. I mean, everyone has to be looked at for what it's worth. You take what you have, but these are all things that make a difference, whether you're talking a group of grown men or children or women that might not be as physically strong. You can't say that I was justified in using the same amount of force. I mean, that's just, it's common sense. It's common decency that's not the case. And that's all taken into account. But certainly community input is important. You can't just, if what you're referring to is, am I going to just talk to the police? Is this what you had to do? No, that's not enough. That's clearly not enough. We deal with it as if it was any other incident that happened. If we came upon a fight or a robbery in a store, we're not just talking to the store owner. We're talking to everybody, including the person that got arrested, to find out everything that happened. Was something justified? Is there more to this? And that's not easy to do, and that's not easy to get community support in, because I get it. We're the police, and essentially we're investigating our own, and that's a tough thing. And a lot of what we try and do is we try and get the district attorney's office involved when our people are involved, because you have to distance yourself. You have to be transparent. And if that means letting an outside agency investigate, then that's the right thing to do. If for no other reason than for the community to feel better about, okay, maybe this will actually be an honest assessment of what happened.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to the next question. Regarding officers who say they got scared and fired inappropriately, is there a mechanism to identify or root out officer candidates that are more prone to being fearful while on patrol? And I think, one of the common terms you hear in a lot of the incidents that have occurred and that we've seen on the news is, I feared for my life. And by default, because I fear for my life, I now have the authority to shoot.
There are mechanisms, and we do use those things. From the time that we hire, we do psychological profiles. There's a battery of tests that we do to find out what the personality type of somebody is. And there have been people that are essentially ready to be hired, but have gone through the psychological testing, and we've been told by the doctor that they have sociopathic tendencies or violent tendencies, and we do not take those types of people. Any officers that have any type of issue, not just not a violent issue per se, but any issue, if a mental health issue or stress related, we make sure that we have not a doctor on staff, but we do have a medical professional that we contract with, and we make sure that our officers deal with that person and find out if there's any issues that need to be discussed. Another thing that we've done, which we feel is important, we try to get away from just using the tools that are given to us. One of the tools, of course, is the gun, but there are a lot of things now that police have moved on to. I guess it's not quite progressive policing, but we've moved away from batons and we've gone to mace and we've gone to tasers. But sometimes those solutions are worse than the original problem. So what we've tried to do is actually train the officers to use their hands more. What we want them to do is feel more comfortable if it comes to it. I'd rather an officer, if they had a suspect that attacks them, to try and get them under control through a wrestling move, or to be able to get them under control and handcuff them, than to use a tool that inflicts pain or that could be deadly. So we want the officer to feel more comfortable with themselves so that they don't feel the need. They don't feel that they're fearful. We also try and train them that people will be argumentative. People will be upset, and those things are okay. That's not something to fear. It should almost be expected. Something as simple as getting a traffic ticket, being involved in a domestic dispute with your spouse. You're going to be upset. You're going to be loud. You're going to be cursing, and you might even focus all that on the officer. And one of the biggest things we try and do is de-escalation, just learning techniques to help people calm, or to just help people, just to let them use you as a sounding board. A lot of times, if you sit there and tell somebody who's upset, calm down, what's that usually do? It usually gets them more upset. I don't like being told to calm down when I'm upset. But if you give them the opportunity to get that out of their system and just listen, oftentimes it dissipates. So we try and find different ways, called verbal judo, de-escalation, different ways to allow people to get that out of their system and realize that it's not necessarily being directed at you. You just happen to be the person there, and you have to accept some of that. You have to let it come at you to make the situation calmer and let it rectify on its own.
So I just want to kind of comment a little bit on what you said in terms of the police officers reacting. And so just my own experience, and I'm sure I see there are some Black males on this call as well that can probably resonate more than I can. But, when we step into, our vehicles, and when we see the lights flashing behind us, fear sets in. And these are the conversations that we have to have with our children because of the multiple instances that happen. And so I want to offer to you that, it's not necessarily always a reactive mode from a police officer fearing for their lives, because it could be a calm situation, which I would, I don't have a number for you in statistics or anything of that nature, but any, citizen, right? It's a normal situation, and someone, fearing for their life because of something they thought was happening should be unacceptable. And I want to I say that so that you can understand a differentiation between, a situation that may escalate to something because of a situation that's going on versus a calm situation where, a perception of the police officer is that something is happening, and now I fear for my life, and that's why I use the term used by default in fear for life. So I just wanted to kind of explain the difference in kind of how I was framing the question. And then I just, another follow-up question. You mentioned the psychological review upon hiring. So, you know, as an owner of a nonprofit that works with children, I have to get my annual clearances every year. Do your officers have to go through certain, I don't quote unquote call them clearances, but do they go through annual psychological reviews just because it's the right thing to do?
Actually, what we do is, and we have it written into our civil service ordinance, that officers have to go once every 3 years. So we send a third of the department every year, just as a matter of course, and that's regardless of whether there's an issue or not. If there's any kind of issue, or if there's a concern from the chief or one of the supervisors, if there's incidents that might have happened, then that person would be sent in addition to their normal check. But the way we have it written is every 3 years, so that we can get the whole department in. So that, you know, it's every few weeks actually when you get the whole department. So it's every 3 years for each officer, unless there's actually an issue where we would send them again for a more comprehensive evaluation.
And is that because of a funding?
A part of it is because of funding. I mean, they're expensive tests. A lot of it also is with between the training that we send officers to, for the you know, physical and mental checks that we send officers to. It's constant. We're, you know, constantly have people out and sending them to these either appointments or training. So it's to be able to function. It's to be able to afford it. I mean, it is a costly thing, and it's a very comprehensive exam that they go to. Again, if we get any kind of input from the doctor that more is needed for that officer, or there's any issues that come by, then of course we follow that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And I'll move on. So our next question comes from Joanna, and she said, you mentioned that there is a written and oral examination to apply to be an officer. Is there also the psychological exam to root out, specifically, I guess, to root out bigots?
There is a psychological exam, and it's designed to find any personality fault. So whether it has to do with racism, whether it has to do with violent tendencies, whether it has to do with that they're a personality type that's not conducive to dealing with people, all these things come out. So yes, we do. We actually have a whole battery of tests besides the written and the oral. There's a polygraph that people are given to find out if there's anything that they're hiding from us. And then, of course, there's the comprehensive physical and psychological examinations that they're given.
Great. I just want to do a time check. You're right, at 8:09. So we have time for one more question. And let me go to my questions. Apologize, I went away. Okay. And this is from Lori. Keep hearing that training is needed. For instance, when an officer abuses a Black citizen who is unarmed, etc. I've seen many instances where a white person is armed and fighting an officer, but the officer restrains himself from abuse. I'm wondering how training is the issue when they can restrain in one situation, but not the other. Can you comment on that, please?
I mean, it's a little difficult to answer that one. It's kind of general. I mean, I don't know if that's the case or not. I mean, certainly it could be. I know if I'm going to put myself in the position of an officer, I honestly don't care what color or what sex that person is. If they have a weapon, that's going to be my primary concern. I can tell you from dealing with our officers, I mean, I never know for sure what's in their heart, but I know these men and women. I make it a point to know these men and women and what they're about. And if they weren't good people at heart, I wouldn't want him here. I wouldn't keep him here. And knowing the chiefs in these other agencies, especially the Colonial area, White Marsh, Conshohocken, I know when they have found officers like that, they've rooted them out. Is it possible that something like that would happen, that they'd use more force on a person of color than they would a white person? I'm sure that that's possible. And maybe it's because that officer who doesn't belong there is for some reason more fearful of somebody of color, which again is certainly a reason to root that person out if you even hired him. But I've got to believe that just for self-preservation, just for the way we do the job, what you look at, anybody with a weapon is going to be deemed as a more of a threat than somebody without. I mean, I can think of an instance, one particular instance where one of our officers, we usually get a lot of runaways from an institution that we have in the township. And some of the kids, unfortunately, are there because they've been abused by their parents, or they've had all kinds of issues where they've been victimized. And in one of these instances, one of the kids had a hatchet, and he threw it at the officer. Now, I know that officer was scared, but he didn't overreact. I mean, that still sounds scary, and I'm sure that technically he might have been justified to use a certain amount of force, but he didn't need to, and he was able to get that kid, and he didn't have to use undue physical force and hurt him, certainly not to shoot him. So what I'm saying is that we do have instances where we're confronted with weapons and we still don't act out in that way. I guess, one of the best things that we could probably do for something like this, and again, it was something that we had in the works, and it kind of got stymied by this COVID, is to get our officers face to face with people that traditionally you would think that they might be, when people say that they're scared of, that they don't understand, for both the citizens and the police to understand better. I mean, I can think of a case, and it reminded me of something that happened almost 30 years earlier. Only about 6 months ago, I was driving down the road, and a car came out of a side street, through the stop sign, and cut me off. And I stopped the car. I put my lights on and I stopped the car. I didn't know who was inside the car. I couldn't tell, it was so fast, but I stopped because they, ran the stop sign. And as soon as I stopped the car, both of the person's hands went out the window. And I could tell that it was a person of color, but they put their hands out the window, which is traditionally what happens if we have a felony car stop and we tell them, so I can see your hands. And then I walked up and I saw that it was a kid in a Domino's uniform. And he was doing that because I guess, he's fearful and he's trying to be safe. And I struck up a conversation with him, and I asked him if he knew why I stopped him. And he says, I was looking, for directions, and I'm trying to deliver this pizza. And after about talking with him for about 30 seconds, in my head, I'm thinking, he's like my kid. He's out, he's trying to make a buck. He's out here, he's scared of me. And for no reason, at least no reason that I can think of, but I know that he's got a different perspective. And by the end of it, I said, hey, have a good day. Go deliver your pizza. Take care. Be safe. And as I'm walking away, he's just like looking at me. And finally, as I'm halfway to my car, he says, hey, be safe out there. But, he had a whole different idea of how that interaction was going to go. And I can think of myself having made a car stop like that 30 years ago, just around the corner, where somebody did the same thing, stuck their hands out of a van when I stopped them. But the person I was back then, I treated that like a felony car stop because I didn't know any better. I was young, and immediately I called it in. This guy must have done something wrong. He's got his hands out. I stayed at my car. I had my gun out, and I'm telling you this because that's somebody that's not thinking straight, that is acting scared. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous because that person that did it when I was 20 something could have been just like this kid that just did it here, that he's just like, I'm just trying to do whatever it takes not to get hurt. And maybe that little communication, just like that little conversation that young man and I had, is enough to explain to some of the officers that, hey, sometimes you just got scared kids out there. Sometimes you just have people that the interaction that they had last week wasn't as nice as your interaction is going to be. And the police, I know, they have to understand that also, that you don't know what that guy's experience is. Just like they don't know what call I just came off of, that my heart might still be beating from the last call I came on. It's not that person's fault, but I also don't know what his life has been like either. I don't know if the last time he got stopped, somebody treated him like a robbery suspect when he's just out delivering pizza. So I get it. And I try and instill that same thing in my officers. I want them to get it. And that's one of the biggest reasons I want to diversify the place. I want officers that share those same experiences. And if people see more officers of color, and if they see more female officers, that at least there's a better give and take. There's a better back and forth. So that's my intention. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here.
Now, I'll just, offer that in terms of the young man that you had the interaction with, not necessarily that he was fearing you per se, but it's what we as Black parents just have to tell our kids when they go out. And it's something I've had this conversation in many D&I conversations that I've moderated, and I've had this debate with specifically white males, that you may have a conversation in how your child should behave with police officers because you want to. But as a Black parent, it's a necessity because of the historical abuse of police on our Black children, because we want our children to come home. And so it's a form out of necessity. And I think it's important to understand that, because it's not necessarily based on a specific experience that this man had. It's an experience of the Black community. So I just wanted to do that. I did say one question, but we can probably do one more question. So I apologize. This question again comes from a community member. Body cam update anonymous. Is there an update on where the department is with body cams? I know this is something the chief moved ahead on early, but I haven't heard if we have them now and how they work, how they are working.
Actually, that was, I'm very proud of that. We are fully integrated with body cameras and cameras in the vehicles. I can't swear to this, but I'm 99% sure that we are the first department. We still might be the only department in Montgomery County that is fully integrated, because I know there's some departments that have tests, or they have it for some of their people. We have it for every officer that's out on the street has a body camera, and every vehicle that's out on the street has a in-car camera, and they're integrated together. So if they turn on their lights to stop a car, that automatically turns on their body camera also. So there's all kinds of safeguards to make sure that sometimes there is a case where an officer legitimately forgets to turn on their camera, or something happens so fast, but we have a bunch of safeguards in place there to try and make that happen automatically. But every interaction that our officers have is supposed to be recorded unless they have good reason. And usually that would come from the citizen, like a confidential informant that doesn't want to be on tape or wants to give information they don't want to be seen. And in cases like that, it has to be documented in the report so that we know. Those are few and far between, but just about every interaction that we have are on camera. So that was one of the first things we did to be more accountable to the community, is to record all of our interactions.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about Blue Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter. And so in the community, CAARSEA has been engaged, and we've heard a lot about folks who have Black Lives Matter signs stolen, people being harassed for having Black Lives Matter signs, yard signs on their yards. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts, right? Black Lives Matter is a movement. And so in your opinion, in your thoughts on your support for the Black Lives Matter movement.
You know, I've actually from the very beginning looked up, tried to find out exactly what Black Lives Matter stands for the national movement, the Philadelphia chapter. And I found bits and pieces, not all of them seem to be exactly on the same page. So what I've tried to concentrate on is, like I ask people to do with us, not to just view us as the police, but to say, okay, our police department, what things need to be done in our police department that the community asks for. So what I try and do is I prefer things like this, where I can talk to somebody face to face and find out specifically what are the issues, what are the problems, what can we do. So I use somebody like John Milligan. I've emailed him. We call each other, even just to check in, just to find out locally, face to face. I want to know specifically, not just something that's on a website. What am I not doing right? What do I need to do? What issues are you seeing? So I like to do the same thing with CAARSEA and any other group that I can interact with to get more specific. But do I, back a movement that's saying that there's a group of people, or there's that there are people that are being treated less than or not being treated by the police? Absolutely, I would support something like that. To be quite honest, I've said it before that, we're public servants. I'm proud to be a public servant. I've done it for 32 years. So if I'm not serving the people in my community, and I shouldn't just say in my community, because as far as I'm concerned with Plymouth, it's not just who lives here, it's who works here, it's who passes through here. If I'm not meeting their needs, then I'm not doing my job. So I need the people to say, whoever that is, that, hey, we're not being represented by you, and this is what I need. So I much prefer than just watching it on the news or reading in the newspaper and say, okay, guys, this is what we need to do. I want to sit down with a group like this, or with the NAACP, and say, talk to me. What is it that I need to work on? What is it that you're not seeing? What kind of training would help? Back and forth conversations, dialogue. So absolutely, I support something like that. But I prefer to keep it down at the grassroots level, where it means something. I mean, if I was to hear something generic about what a police might need to do when it applies to a department of 7,000 or 8,000 people, it might not be the same as what we need to do. I understand that there's some problems that might be universal, or perceptions might be universal, but there might be some things, and there are quite a lot of things that we're already doing, and maybe we're not doing them the right way. But I need to hear that from human beings rather than just from a poster or a website. So absolutely, I support the issues. I'm sorry,
That's
but
fine. I mean, it's. I mean, you can say it, right? Black Lives Matter. And I'll offer this analogy, and then I'll bring us to a close. And so, from a Black Lives Matter perspective, I heard this analogy and I thought it was really great. Right, we're in a pandemic right now. The country, the world, we're in a pandemic, and because we're in a pandemic, that is the focus. The focus is on COVID right now, because people are dying daily from this pandemic. And so it doesn't mean that because we're focused on COVID, that cancer doesn't matter or diabetes doesn't matter. And so right now, it's the same from a behavioral perspective with Black Lives Matter. And so our Black families, our Black men, our Black children are dying at the hands of police and at the hands of people who want to take matters into their own hands. And so Black Lives Matter is not to say that everyone's life doesn't matter. It's to say that right now, in this time, in this season, we need to address the issues with Black Lives Matter. So I'll bring us to a close with that. Thank you, Chief, for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you for the community as well for joining us. Thank you for all of your questions. I know that I'm not paying attention to the chat, but I know that there are a lot of questions that came in. And so we will gather those questions and we will get them to the Chief So thank you all for participating, and thank you for your time and attention, and looking forward to more conversations with this chief and hopefully with the other chiefs that serve the Colonial community. So I'll turn it back over to Bridget.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight and sticking around. We have a very lively chat going on. All of this will be documented, questions and comments. It will be documented, and then we will be figuring out the best way to disseminate all the information once the chief has gotten a chance to respond. So please do not hesitate. If you have something you would like to ask anonymously, please send it to us, either direct message via our Facebook group. You can send it directly to the chief. We have his email address on this slide, or you can send it to us in through our CAARSEA Gmail. And we will compile everything, get it organized, and get it back out to you. We want you to know you are heard. And if you took the time tonight, you should get your questions answered, and we will make sure that that happens. We also ask you to like both of the Facebook pages so that you can be in the know on what's going on social media, and you can give us feedback on how we're doing and other topics that you want to talk about. And we thank you for being part of this conversation. The divide in our community over issues of police brutality and Black lives is obviously quite significant. We communicated tonight, and it's clear that people are hurting. We didn't hear your voices, but we read them, and the chief will read them. And the only possible way to overcome this is honesty, transparency, and to start to rebuild the systems that are harming our fellow humans. And these moments have to continue to happen. And I speak on behalf of CAARSEA when I say we are committed every single day to working toward a safer, more equitable community for our Black and brown neighbors. And we will not stop. So thank you again. Good night, and get out the vote. We have 13 days. Okay. Thank you. And everyone be safe, be healthy, wear a mask. Good night.